Yes, hello, welcome to Post-Exertional Mayonnaise, a podcast about living with ME and chronic illness, creativity and making meaning. I'm joined by Lia Pas today, and it's brilliant to have you. And if you don't mind, I'll just read your bio from your website, and then people can get to know you from there. So, Lia is a Saskatoon-based Canadian multidisciplinary artist who works in the fields of music, writing, and visual arts. She is an accomplished composer and musician. She plays oboe, piano, and voice, published author of non-fiction libretti scripts, 3 books of poetry, and 2 video poems. Her work has been broadcast on CBC and BBC Radio, and her fibre art has been featured in numerous online publications, exhibited at medical humanities conferences, and is part of the Sask Arts Board's permanent collection. She worked primarily as a composer-performer for 35 years until she became disabled by post-viral myalgic encephalomyelitis or chronic fatigue syndrome in 2015. So yeah, I guess it's coming up to sort of like 9-10 years for you. It's
Yes.
does that feel like a milestone?
Um, yes and no. I feel like I have arranged my life so that it works well with the way I function now. So yeah, it's been almost 10 years, but I would say even though I am disabled, I have a good life. I'm still able to do creative work. I have a supportive family. It's just my life is completely different than it was 10 years ago.
Mm. So what did it look like for you? Do you want to tell us a little bit about that sort of process for you of, if it's not too painful, I guess it is for many of us, isn't it? That thinking back to the time when we became ill, but what did life look like before for you, and what does it look like now?
Um, the year before I got sick, it was probably one of the most intense years of my career. I was a sessional lecturer at the drama department here at the University of Saskatchewan. I was teaching voice there. I had a private voice coaching practice. I was composing a lot of music for dancers, and I was working on a full-length dance opera with a dance
Wow.
company in Calgary. Um, and I actually got sick in Calgary while I was working on the dance opera. A couple of members of the company came down with some sort of virus, and I left the next day. And when I got home, I was I was out.
Mm,
Yeah, it happened very, very quickly for me.
mm.
Yeah.
And then was that quite a difficult process in terms of like having, did you become quite severe quite soon? And then was there a diagnostic process that you went through, or how was that for you?
Um, yeah, I got very, very sick. I don't know what virus I got. But I was tingly over my entire body. I was
Mm,
tingly everywhere, which was very disconcerting. Um, and having what I now know is orthostatic intolerance, but I didn't know what it was. So it's
mm,
like my heart rate going up and down and dizziness and tingling. But because I was so tingly, I went to my GP as soon as I could, and she actually put me on Guillain-Barré watch. I'm not sure if you're
mm.
familiar with that. That's where your autonomic nervous system kind of shuts down. You stop breathing.
Got you.
Um,
Wow.
so she called me at home every day for a week
Wow.
and would give me the name of the neurologist on call at the hospital. And they were
Wow.
aware that I might have to go in. So that's how sick I got right away.
Wow.
Um, but my GP is amazing. She's absolutely incredible. Um, she did nerve conduction studies, which came back fine. A bunch of blood tests, which came back fine. And then a month into things, she said, "I think you might have chronic fatigue syndrome."
Hmm.
And the reason she was familiar with it was she has a friend who has MECFS. And she told me, she said, rest. Do not exert
Mm.
yourself. Rest, rest, rest. You think you've rested enough? Rest more. Um, and I think that might be why I am so functional now,
Wow.
was because I was told to rest at the
Mm.
beginning. When many people aren't, many people are told to push through, and she gave me the
Yeah.
opposite advice. So
Yeah.
so she's been great. Um, and there's also a functional medicine doctor in town here. Um, so functional medicine means different things, different places, but basically
Mm.
he's a medical doctor, but he's also trained in sort of more natural sides of things. So Chinese medicine and herbal medicine and stuff like that. But he is a
Interesting.
medical doctor.
Yeah.
Um, and I saw him probably about 6 to 8 months into getting sick, and he really helped me because he was familiar with it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Were there specific things that kind of supported you more than others, or is it kind of like quite a difficult thing to kind of put your finger on what helped specifically at that time?
Um, I mean, I've had a lot of things that have helped me. He put me on a really strict ketogenic diet. I'm not
Mm.
sure if people are familiar with that, but it's like high fat, extremely low carbohydrate diet. And I was eating like 20 grams of carbohydrates a day. So
Wow.
which is almost nothing. So I was getting my carbohydrates from vegetables
Yeah.
and like no grains, no fruit. And that really helped me. Within a month, I was surprised how much it helped because
Yeah.
it's sort of controversial. Um, I'm on some supplements that help. He put me on low dose naltrexone after a couple of years, and that has
Mm.
helped me. I know it doesn't help everyone, but rest, pacing, um, meditation has helped me. I know meditation's not for everyone, but I used to teach yoga. I taught yoga and meditation for 10, 15 years before I switched over to teaching voice. And when I first got sick, because I was so sick, I couldn't do anything. Um,
Mm.
to the point, I mean, sometimes I had to, put an eye mask on and noise canceling headphones and like the
Mm.
whole sensory deprivation thing. And so I meditated a lot. And I honestly think that helped. But I had a good meditation practice established already. I just made it much, much longer.
Mm. Yeah, and it's interesting, like, because I went through a phase where I was meditating, but I found it quite exhausting as well. And yeah, it'd be interesting. Yeah, we might get on to sort of talking about things like that. But yeah, it's an interesting one because it especially something like the body scanning stuff. When I went to a few sort of Buddhist meditation classes when I first became ill, and I was like, oh, and the meditation I could like really appreciate. But as soon as it started like focusing on parts of your body, I was like, I was just very aware then. I was even like more aware of like the achiness and the like. Well, my legs really achy, but I hadn't noticed it was achy until I started doing that. So
Yeah,
yeah, the body scanning bit of it wasn't so helpful, but yeah, it's helpful to kind of get your head into a mindset that's other, isn't it, in a way? So
yeah, and I think one of the things that meditation helps do is it it helps you play with time.
mm,
So if you're in a meditative state, time goes by very, very, very quickly. And when
mm,
you can't do anything, that is the best thing in the world.
mm,
Um, I mean, there's all sorts of documented, it helps your immune system and helps you sleep and all those things. But being able to manipulate your sense of time is very helpful when you are very ill.
that's
That's
interesting.
that's my experience of
Yeah.
it. And maybe, maybe my work in music, because I see music as a way of manipulating time as well.
Mm.
And being an artist, going into flow states also helps you manipulate time.
Mm.
So I'm all about manipulating time. Um, but meditation is one way to do that. But
Mm.
what you said about the body scans, I agree. If someone is very symptomatic and does a body scan without the proper preparation, it's it can be harmful, I think.
Mm.
Meditation is very powerful, and you can be harmed
Yeah.
if you haven't done the preparation to do that work and you're very symptomatic.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, so I think certainly for me, I just wasn't kind of expecting that. I was like, oh yeah, this is kind of like, this is quite sort of like heavy, yeah, heavy going, like, and it then makes it harder to get into that sort of like other place in a sense when you then actually, rather than the body scanning being a process to get into the meditation, it becomes a process of almost like stopping you sort of from getting into that place because you then
yeah,
become so aware. It's interesting, isn't it? Yeah.
yeah.
Um, yeah. How was it for you being a really creative person, becoming ill? How did you sort of like go through that process, and how did you, was that frustrating not being able to be creative in the same way because you'd been so musical as well before? Was that something that you could still incorporate into your everyday life, or was that hard?
I couldn't even listen to music at first
Wow.
because I was so sound sensitive. Um, and I have a very emotional connection to music.
Mm.
So I think most people with ME know that you can get post-exertional malaise from emotional
Mm.
experiences as well. Um, I do remember once the dance opera I had been working on, it was produced. So I got sick in August, and they performed it in February, and the director sent me recording, and I could only listen to a minute or two at a time. I wanted to listen to the whole hour
Mm.
long thing and video and the whole bit, and
Mm.
a minute or two, and that it was, there was grief and
Mm.
there was sensory overwhelm.
Mm.
Um, and I actually lent my piano, my electric keyboard, to a friend um, for a year because I just didn't want
Mm.
it in my studio because it was just too much
Yeah.
for me to just have it there sitting there. I couldn't do anything with it. And I
Yeah.
was a singer, and I still can't sing. I'm
Mm.
starting to do very small vocal warm-ups. Um, I did start writing fairly early on. Um, and I sort of worked up my writing stamina very, very slowly. I would write for a minute a
Wow.
day at first, because sometimes I couldn't read,
Hmm.
especially nonfiction. Fiction, I was able to read a bit, and poetry, again, that emotional connection was too much for
Mm.
me. But I would just write. I would just journal for 1 minute, and then once that felt easy, I journaled for 2 minutes. Um, and now I can write for like half an hour, no problem. Which you can get a lot of writing done in half an hour.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but uh, but discovering that embroidery worked for me
Mm.
was that was where things really started to shift for me, moving from grief into being able to be creative again.
Mm.
I mean, the writing helped, absolutely. I went back through my journals a few years ago. I went back through my journals from that time, and even my handwriting is different. Like
Hmm.
it's quite phenomenal. But the embroidery, I was watching a lot of period dramas because they're pretty chill,
Mm.
And this doctor told this woman to take to her bed and work on her embroidery, which I think was supposed to be a negative
Yeah.
thing. But I was like, hmm, why don't I try this? And
Yeah.
so I called my mom and I got, because I knew there was some, she had some embroidery stuff at her place because we had worked together on my sister's Ukrainian dance costumes. I had done some of the
Wow.
Ukrainian cross stitch in high school. So I knew
Yeah.
my mom doesn't throw anything out. So I knew she still had stuff. And she brought it over and I started embroidering scientific diagrams because I'm not a flower kind of person.
Yeah.
Um, Looked up stitches on the internet and and I was hooked because it
Mm.
was slow. I could do it reclining. It's very meditative, but I was making something.
Mm.
That was the
So was
thing.
how did you come about the idea of the sort of scientific diagrams and the anatomy sort of side of it? Because like, that's it's not just like taking a pattern and then sort of deciding, right, I'm going to copy this pattern and then and create a piece of something to put on the wall. You're actually creating something new with that process. Was that would you like draw them out first, or
Um,
how
well,
does that look, the process?
I had been working with anatomy imagery in a lot of my work before I got sick.
Hmm.
Um, I've been writing poetry about anatomy. I had been taking scientific diagrams from anatomy books and rewriting the labels as poetry, stuff
Hmm.
like that. So I took one of those diagrams with where I had rewritten the labels as poetry, and that was my first embroidery. Um, and and just went into it from there. My mom's a scientist. She's a physiologist,
Hmm.
toxicologist, and hematologist. So I grew up
Wow.
around those sciences, and I'm surrounded by like there's doctors and pharmacists and nurses in my family.
Mm.
So I grew up with a lot of science, but I went into the arts.
Yeah, yeah.
But they started to combine even before I got sick.
Mm. You're sort of drawn back to it somehow, yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Um, yeah, and I think there's something really um, unique about what you do through that media, that sort of the method in terms of it. It's very unique and it's very striking. Um, with a and we've got I know you sent me some that we could talk about. Uh, were the ones that are particularly um, sort of special for you, or I guess they're all special as you're going through and producing them, aren't they? And which ones are there any that sort of stand out for you?
Um, oh, that's hard to. I forgot to turn my notifications off. Um, it's hard to pick one because each one kind of has a story behind it because they take
Mm,
months to do some of them. Um, I know I sent you the one with the hand, the paresthesia hand,
mm,
is the hand with the blue, and that was my first symptomatology piece. Um, we were talking about body scans earlier,
mm,
and I said it's important to be properly prepared to do body
yeah.
scans. But I was prepared. I had a lot of meditation experience, and sometimes when I was especially tingly, I would meditate and I would start to dissect all the sensations in my
Mm,
body. So I would feel the pain, I would feel the tingling, but I would try to parse it apart. It's like, okay, where exactly am I tingly?
mm,
How small are the tingles? How big are the tingles? Is there a color associated? And that was, and I found that very helpful because the sensations then became less powerful
mm,
because I became sort of more curious about them than frustrated by them.
mm,
Um, and I had been doing a lot of embroidery. and I was meditating like this, and I started to see them as stitches in
Mm.
cloth, and I was like, oh, I'll just do my hands. So that's easy. I can just trace my hand, do my hand, and that's how that idea came. Um, and then I did the body map piece, which I also sent you.
Yeah.
Um, that I did almost a year after I got ill. And I decided to just go with that idea of dissecting the symptoms. I took a body from an old anatomical textbook, a woman's body, and just and did all the intricate stitches. You see that was all freehand. That was what I was feeling in the moment.
Hmm.
Um,
And how big is that piece? Because it's hard to get a sense of
it's
sort of.
it's probably about a foot tall.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, it's probably about a foot
It's
tall. So it's not
it's
it's
one of
not
the ones
it's
that's the
not that
most.
big.
It's striking, and I think what it makes you see is particularly the condition just affects every part of us, doesn't it? In a sense, it's like it's the joints, it's the muscles, it's the sinew, it's the kind of like it's each kind of part of your body, and you've kind of highlighted that through the work. It's amazing.
Yeah, and that's I think it gets across how overwhelming ME can be
Mm,
because we have so many symptoms. I mean, you sometimes see these lists of symptoms and they're just like
mm,
they're pages long. We're
mm,
so symptomatic. Um, but my I was seeing a psychotherapist at the time when I did that piece, and I showed it to her, and she used this phrase exquisite attention, which I really
mm,
liked. She said you're
mm,
offering exquisite attention to your symptoms, and
mm,
and figuring them out not from a medical standpoint but from a artistic standpoint.
mm,
And I really like that exquisite
mm,
attention because it does describe sort of the type of focus I use to make those symptomatology pieces.
mm. And it's almost like creating a language, creating a relationship, isn't it, with your own body through the art, and it's um yeah, it's fascinating, and particularly you've got kind of like the nerves almost like coming from the brain and right down the neck and down sort of through to the arm is yeah, it reminds us that kind of the brain seems to be the kind of thing that impacts everything else in a roundabout way, doesn't it? And we don't quite know exactly what's going on, and that's the fascinating part of it. That
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. The
yeah,
piece I'm working on now, I think I sent you the green one of the vagus
mm,
nerve. Um, I started that one because I was interested in that connection, like how the vagus nerve is the biggest nerve in the body.
mm,
It has so many attachments and branches and things, but it starts in the brain. Um, and it controls the autonomic nervous system, so our breathing, our heart rate, our digestion. And with ME, we have issues with all those things. Orthostatic intolerance is often because of the vagus nerve.
mm,
So doing research for that piece, and that piece is big. It's 2 feet
mm.
tall.
Wow.
So it's taking me a while.
Mm,
But researching about the vagus nerve and learning to work with my vagus nerve, I started researching polyvagal theory,
mm,
which is a technique. It's a little bit controversial, um,
mm,
but they talk about neuroception, so being aware of what your vagus nerve is doing and being able to shift states. So I'm finding it really useful for my symptom management, actually. Um, so I've been doing a lot of research in order to make that piece, and
interesting.
um, and playing with polyvagal theory techniques to calm the vagus nerve, and it does help some of my symptoms, which is awesome
Mm.
and fascinating at the same time. It's like I'm not taking any
Yeah.
medication to do this. I'm doing these bizarre little like ear massage and looking to one side for 1 minute without turning your head and stuff like weird little things,
Mm.
but they help. So
Mm.
I'm just going with it.
A funny thing with me is I get these tremors, and they just like started about 6 months after I got ill with ME, and I had the tingly sensations as well. And what's funny about ME is like symptoms come and go. So you'll have something for a few months, and then it'll like you'll suddenly realize, oh, I haven't got that anymore, and oh, that's good. But then this other thing's come and replaced it. So it's yeah, and I started with the tremors, and that can be the hand, the head. I got like had like scans and stuff just to make sure there wasn't anything else going on, and they diagnosed FND, functional neurological disorder. So it's like, but then so many people report tremors with ME as well. So it's like, what's going on? So um, part of me felt very frustrated with the lack of support, lack of information given. And the other part of me was like, okay, well, this is really strange. And like the meditation thing was interesting because I could find that I couldn't switch off the tremors. I couldn't stop them. And especially when the pretty violent ones, my head's just like shaking like that. And but the milder ones in my legs, I could kind of like meditate and almost like meditate in my mind to lift the tremoring off the limb, but then I couldn't stop it, so it had to go somewhere else. So it's almost like in my mind I was moving this tremor around, but I couldn't stop it, and it was very frustrating. But yeah, it's that's fascinating. But it'd be interesting to know, yeah, if the vagal nerve was involved in that somehow as well. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah, because tremors, I when I was first sick, I would sometimes get tremors in my hands.
Mm.
Um, and they calmed down. Like they were never intense enough to stop me from embroidering.
Mm.
Um, but they calmed down as my symptoms improved. They calmed as everything improved. The
Yeah.
tremors
Yeah.
went away, but they're so involuntary.
Mm.
Like like you have no control over them. But it's interesting what you said about how you could sort of move move them around,
When I
but
got into this sort of
without,
sense of
yeah,
meditation, and I was kind of like sort of almost like visualizing it sort of thing, and as a cloud sort of thing, and then moving, but I couldn't stop it. I had to, yeah, it sort of moved around. But yeah, it's
it's
that
almost,
strange relationship with our brains and our bodies, and um, you know, we don't want to fall down this sort of rabbit warren of it being psychologized, but at the same time, there is like an interplay that's acknowledged, isn't there? In terms of, like you said, our emotions, or if we're feeling low in mood, that impacts, or we need stimulation as well. And there's a whole sort of dynamic going on there, isn't there? It's interesting.
yeah. And in polyvagal theory, they talk about connections between mood and the autonomic nervous system, which
Mm.
is fascinating to me.
Mm.
So um, they split in polyvagal. It's called polyvagal because they split the vagus nerve into three parts. So there's the sympathetic, which is fight or flight, so stress response, and there's dorsal vagal, which is more like a freeze or immobilize state, a
Mm.
more depressive state. And then there's ventral vagal, which they say is like socially engaged, feeling good, feeling well. Um, but but if you're in a dorsal vagal state because your vagus nerve is having issues, like actual physical biological issues, you will not be able to move,
Mm.
which to me is really interesting with ME/CFS because
Mm.
ME puts you into a dorsal vagal state.
Mm,
And if they can find that connection biologically, what might that shift for us
mm.
with ME? So yeah, polyvagal theory is a big rabbit hole to go down. I'm just like brushing the surface here,
We need a whole
but
episode on that. I think
but it's
that's fascinating. And
fascinating.
yeah, I've seen people going out and buying the stimulators and things for their ears, and I think, oh, maybe I should, yeah, maybe I should try that. I've just not gone out of my way to do it, and then
Same.
and yeah, it's a it's something I probably need to look into. It's interesting. It's fascinating. So yeah. Um, so there was one of the picture that you sent through was of a uterus. Is that
Oh
sort of what
yes.
that was fascinating?
Um, that piece is I sort of combine symptomatology and anatomy. So um, for as it is for many women with ME, periods put us into a complete
Mm,
crash, ridiculous crash. So like every month I would crash for a week. Um, I found out I had fibroids, which is probably partially what I crashed because I lost a lot of blood every month. And we have low blood volume to begin with in ME.
mm,
And so you lose a bunch of blood. Of course, you're going to crash. But when it started being investigated, I found out I had stage 1A endometrial cancer.
wow,
So ended up having a complete hysterectomy. And
wow,
that all happened while I was making that piece. When I started that piece, I didn't know. I knew I had fibroids. They were starting to be investigated, so I was able to access not the actual images of my medical imaging, but the reports, so descriptions. On that piece, there's the big beaded fibroids. That's
mm,
actual measurements of the fibroids
oh,
I had.
wow,
Like they were huge,
wow,
huge. Um, and because they found the endometrial cancer so early, the hysterectomy took care of it. I need to go for every 6 months for checkups, but for 5 years. But I showed my gynecologist the embroidery. I was working on it while recovering from my hysterectomy in the hospital.
wow,
Um, and and she's like, I know you told me you were working on an embroidery, but wow,
yeah,
she was very impressed. Um, so that I took my symptoms, but I also took the imaging
mm,
and combined it all with a very old engraving of a uterus from Gray's Anatomy. Um,
wow,
and I've since done another piece on I have these bizarre liver issues that no one is sure what they're from. Don't even have a real name for what's going on with my liver and biliary system, but I have a liver piece, which I didn't send you, but I could after the fact, about the liver issues I have. So again, symptomatology and anatomy combined.
mm.
Um, but when I do get to see my actual medical imaging, of course I do stuff with that. That's
What can I
rare.
do with this?
I a few weeks ago I had a venogram, where they take pictures of your veins in
Wow,
real time. It's like a movie of your veins. I have a stent in my iliac vein, because my veins were crossing, my vein and my artery were crossing over, and I got a big DVT in my leg. Anyway,
wow,
long story short, they put a stent in there to fix it. It's a anatomical anomaly that you're born with. Um, but they check the stent every year, and they found a little clot near one end, so they wanted to do more precise imaging. And the radiologist showed me the movie of my veins and my stent and everything, and I was just like, oh my goodness, I have to do a piece on that. So I have a sketch. I think
wow.
that's my next piece.
Yeah,
I get very
there's
excited and very nerdy about stuff like that.
yeah. and you just get drawn. Do you get very? You mentioned about the flow earlier, and that's an interesting sort of thing because I've felt that at times playing guitar. Not that I'm massively musical, but like I know what you mean. Is that something? Is that like a zone that you get into when you're embroidering, or is that something that's sort of just for music for you, or is that something that's transferable?
It anything creative, I can get there.
Mm,
Um, I I need to have flow states in my life. It's something I've known about myself for a long time. I've had times where I've had a day job and so didn't have time for creative work, and
mm,
I'm miserable. I'm so miserable. So that I think that was why I tried so hard to even do little bits of creative work when I was really severely ill, was because I knew I needed those flow states
mm,
to just be myself.
mm,
Um, and I at that point I think I trained myself to go into a flow state very quickly, very
mm,
quickly. So I can do it like within a minute now. And I use timers a lot to pace myself so I don't overdo it, because when I get into a
mm.
flow state, I will lose track of time completely. So if I set a timer, I will stop and not exhaust myself, which is really important now that I can play the piano again. I
Right.
absolutely need the timer for that because it's very physical and
Yeah.
very physical, emotional, and the sound
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
But flow states are vital to
Yeah.
me as a person.
It's almost like a double-edged sword, isn't it? It's like something you need as part of your life, but also kind of like it has that kind of like dangerous side to it. And yeah, I went through a phase where I was like processing my illness and making music and writing songs, and then I had to kind of record this song, and then I had to kind of, not that my musical ability is amazing or that my singing voice is amazing. It's probably got worse over the last like 6 years since I've been ill, but yeah, a couple of years ago, a friend kept bringing us like recording equipment and stuff like that. So I was like, okay, and but yeah, getting into that flow, but suddenly you'd be sort of like fiddling around with something, some sort of EQ setting on your computer or something, and you realize you've been doing that for like half an hour, 40 minutes, and I'm like, I've put so much concentration into this, and I have to stop. And it's like it was I was realizing that sort of making the music was something that I was driven to do, but at the same time I had to kind of pull myself back from it because I
Yes.
realized like how draining it was for me, even though it was something that was good in a sense for me at that time. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's,
What I've started doing, especially with the music, is I always have a notepad, and and the timer rings and I just write down what was in my mind at the time, what I need to remember so that when I come back to it, it's still there.
mm,
So I have like all these weird pieces of paper, like I have one by the piano and I have one I have various notes on my computer. I have this journal that I do everything. I write little notes in all the
wow.
time. I'm always making little notes so that I can pick up where I left off.
Yeah. Um, and you've somebody who's kind of got a lot of different things happening for you in the sense of like your writing and your music and your embroidery um and I read a great piece that you'd written about Stoic philosophy, and I thought that would be something that would be interesting to talk about because like I went through a phase when after I became ill of like looking into different, like I said, I had this sort of like Buddhist kind of thing. I went along to the Buddhism thing, and I was also then yeah, looking into philosophy and trying to, you know, um, the Buddhism was one thing, but then I was kind of trying to make sense of things, and I think philosophy helps you do that. So you've written about Stoicism. Do you want to tell us a bit about what is Stoicism, and how it's helped you?
Um, yeah, the first thing people need to know about Stoicism is there's small s Stoic and then there's Stoicism. Small s
Got you.
Stoic is an emotional, you know,
Yeah.
wrapped up in toxic masculinity, really.
Mm,
That's small s Stoic. Stoicism is about flourishing. It's about,
mm,
they call it eudaimonia, finding flourishing, finding joy in every moment. Um, Stoics feel emotions. We are not emotionless people. Um, Far from it. We feel emotions, but we don't let them control us. So you feel an emotion and you decide what to do with that emotion.
Mm.
Um, but it's so I can go down a big rabbit hole with stoicism, but everything about stoicism is framed by your character. And in stoicism, they talk about virtue. There are four
Mm.
virtues that you focus on: wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. Um, and I found that framework really, really useful. So everything is about finding joy. It's about knowing what you can and what you can't control in your life. Um, and it's about framing the way you are in the world according to the four virtues. That's in a nutshell. But the one Stoic concept that I find really helpful with ME is the body is something you do not control, which
Yeah.
is weird for people to wrap their head around when they're healthy. It's like, of
Yeah.
course I control my body. But when you're
Yeah.
sick, when you have ME, of course you do not control your body. You have no, like we talked about the tremors. Tremors are a really good
Yeah.
example. You have no
Yeah.
control over that.
No.
Um, so accepting that your body is outside your realm of control
Mm.
is very freeing. It's like, okay, my body's doing this thing, and that's the way it is. How
Mm.
can I work with that?
Mm.
That's been a huge paradigm shift for me. So
Yeah.
I work within the limitations my body gives me.
Yeah. Yeah, the free will thing's really interesting because I went down like a theological rabbit hole as well, in thinking about these kind of like bigger issues of it's like I think I almost went after I became ill. It's almost like yeah, I had a bit of a um exponent ex what's the word I'm looking for? This is my brain fog now. Yeah, I had a bit of a an interesting experience of trying to make sense of the world and existential crisis. That's the word I'm looking for.
Existential.
Yeah, very much so. And yeah, and going down these yeah different sort of paths to sort of find how we make sense of suffering and things like that are sort of big life questions, aren't they? Um, and I'm trying to think how I was unpacking that, and I'm not sure now. But yeah, the the flourishing bit is a difficult one. Is that something because it's hard not to get depressed when living with Emmy and things, isn't it? But and the mental health side is like really important. Um, but do you see that flourishing is something that's possible when you
I
live
do
with
think it's
suffering?
possible.
Hmm.
Um, I think I think we can get too wrapped up in our suffering.
Hmm.
Um, I'm not saying that we don't suffer. I mean, but I think to um, to go down the path of I am my suffering is very damaging to oneself.
Hmm.
To recognize that yes, I am suffering. What am I going to do with it? It's not what am I going to do about it. What am I going to
Hmm.
do with my suffering? Very, very, very different.
Hmm.
Um, and related to that, with a crash, with an MECFS crash, I I like to think of it as giving over to the crash, not giving up,
Hmm. Yeah.
because that's where you that's where you're at.
Hmm.
That's where you're at.
Hmm.
Um, so what are you going to do with the suffering? Are you going to wallow in it? You know, that that's your choice to wallow
Hmm.
in it, or are you going to find find something find some meaning in
Hmm.
where you're at?
Mm.
So when I was much more severely ill. Now I would say I'm like moderate towards mild. Moderate if I try to leave the house, mild
Mm.
if I don't. Um, but when I was more severely ill, just finding beauty in the small things. It's
Mm.
like, you know, like right now, I'm in my studio. I can see I have this box that I bought, this antique bento box that I bought in Japan. It stacks. It's
Mm.
really beautiful. It's got a moon branches with some plum blossoms on it. Like just looking at that, and I'm like, oh, I can look at that when I'm suffering and still find joy.
Mm.
It's small things make
The
such
beauty,
a big
yeah,
difference.
yeah. Um, and almost like the mindfulness, isn't it, in terms of kind of being more aware of like, and again, it's that difficulty of like, it's being more aware, but at the same time, not focusing on the things that are making us ill, so the exhaustion and things like that, and it's finding a way through that, isn't it? And yeah,
And
it's
there's another concept in Stoicism that I find helpful called the obstacle is the way,
hmm,
or what stands in the way becomes the way. That sounds very Taoist when you put it that way.
hmm.
Um, um, but but to like I did with my embroidery. I mean that's my example is I was in pain, I was all tingly, and I went into it. That obstacle of pain and tingliness and overwhelming sensation became the way I made art.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I'm not saying it's easy to figure this stuff out.
Hmm.
I spent a fair bit of time thinking about this, obviously, um, but I think it's worth trying to figure out.
Hmm.
And Stoicism for me offered a really good framework for figuring that out because it's a very structured philosophy.
Hmm.
Um, it's only when you go deeper into it that you get really metaphysical, um, and start talking about, what is God, what is the universe, what is our meaning as
Yeah,
humans.
yeah,
It does go there,
yeah, yeah,
um, but because it's so structured, um, you can get into Stoicism very quickly and understand the basic concepts and use them to help yourself.
yeah.
And I'm going to mention CBT here, which I know is a big can of worms for anyone with ME. Um, but cognitive behavioral therapy was developed from Stoicism. Now, that might turn some
Interesting.
people off Stoicism
Yeah.
because I know CBT has been used badly with a lot of people with ME. But I think that is hubris on part of the CBT, those particular CBT therapists.
Hmm.
Um, there's a writer and CBT therapist in the modern Stoic community called Donald Robertson. He writes really well about the connections between Stoicism and cognitive behavioral therapy and what what the therapy lacks and what Stoicism has. Um, but there are a lot of coping strategies in there that are very
Hmm.
helpful. Um, so Stoicism can be used to help yourself as a self-help method. Donald would hate
Hmm.
me saying that if he watches this. Don't say self-help, Leah. Um, but there's techniques and there's ways to think about things. And if people want to go into that, into the practices of Stoicism, there's a website called Modern Stoicism, and they run something called Stoic Week every
Hmm.
year. And it's a week long how to live like a Stoic course, and you
Hmm.
can download the past workbooks for free. It's free. Stoic Week is free, and work through it at your own pace. But that isn't excellent introduction to Stoicism. It's Modern
Interesting.
Stoicism's Stoic Week workbooks.
Yeah. So yeah, no, thanks for sharing with us. And what I'll do is I'll put a link in the description for yeah the Stoic Week stuff. And yeah, if you want to forward anything through that we can put in the
Yeah.
description, that'd be brilliant. So yeah, I think it's for each one of us. It's about finding something that kind of works for us, doesn't it? In terms of how we get through every day, like how we see the world, like how we frame the world, and how we exist within it. Because it's not easy, is it? And it's helpful to have certain frameworks to kind of like yeah to live by. I think yeah, it'd be interesting. I'd be interested to learn more, and I think for me, like I spent an awful lot of time thinking about so many things that it's almost like I realized that I was having an existential crisis alongside ME, which didn't really help because like my brain was just on fire all the time. What about this? What about that? And yeah, like what is suffering within the world? And yeah, like some really sort of like deep, heavy questions. And probably once I kind of came to the point of like peace with it, I realized that it was easier to manage my ME because I wasn't kind of like going off on these just different all over the
Yes.
place, in terms of kind of like how I make sense of the world.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hence my notebooks.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and like even like I said before, even writing a minute a day would get stuff out of my head,
Mm,
and that was helpful because
yeah.
I've been there. I go there quite often. My brain just goes stuff, 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 stuff,
Yeah.
stuff, and writing it
Yeah.
down
Yeah.
is very helpful.
How kind of rewarding, how like helpful is it that you've been able to kind of like do some music again? Was that something that was really important for you? Was that kind of quite healing process? Being able to go back to music?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I have to go through such a long process to get back to music because my hyperacusis was so
Mm,
horrendous. It was really, and I still have to be careful with with certain types of sounds. Um, but yeah, I mean, I've been in music my whole life,
mm,
so to have to give it up completely with like there was this void there. Um, and starting very small, 1 minute at the piano.
mm.
Just can I play a scale? Can I figure out a key signature? Um, I'm right now learning some music that I've never learned before, and that's been
Wow.
an interesting process. I used to be an amazing sight reader, but
Mm.
that's I mean it probably doesn't help that I'm using Satie and does all sorts of weird things on his scores. But uh,
Yeah.
but uh, but that's interesting. I started trying to write some music a couple of weeks ago, like actually write it down on the page, which I used to be able to do
Mm.
very easily, and that's still a struggle. But getting back into improvisation,
Mm.
that has helped. I've always improvised. Um, my mom used to set a timer for half an hour, and she had to hear me practicing the piano for half an hour. That was the rule.
Mm.
She didn't read music at that point. And I would just make stuff up and then show up
Yeah.
to my lessons and sight read.
Yeah.
That was my piano until
Yeah.
my teacher figured it out. Um,
That's brilliant.
and got me some harder music that I had to actually think about. So I've always improvised, and going back to improvisation helped. And this past year, I started posting live improvisations on Instagram live because I was
Mm.
like, I, I, I all of a sudden for some reason wanted to share it again, which that was a big shift for me, going from just
Mm.
doing music professionally, then slowly getting back into it for myself, just
Mm.
for my own flourishing, and then wanting to share it again. That was
Mm.
a huge shift. And feeling well enough to, turn on Instagram Live and do a 10-minute improvisation for
Mm,
whoever's listening. That's been awesome. That's been lovely to be able to do that
mm.
again.
And we'll put links for your Instagram in for people to go and listen to because, yeah, because you recently just put out something called The Hum, which is a which I listened to the excerpt from that, and yeah, I need to go and sort of download it. But it's quite a few minutes long, but is that an expression of like tinnitus or something like that?
Well, what with my hyperacusis, I
Yeah.
hear this constant low-pitched hum all
Wow.
the time.
Mm.
I think it's the sound of the city that no one else can
Mm.
hear, but I can hear it. I can feel it sometimes. Like my whole body
Mm.
is vibrating with it sometimes. So I decided to approach my music like I did my embroidery. How can I use these symptoms to make art?
Mm.
So the hum, there's layered drones at the bottom, very low pitched layered drones to represent the hum. And when I listen to them, I can't hear the hum of the city because it masks it.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
it's therapeutic as well.
Mm.
And I also have tinnitus, which ebbs and flows like tinnitus tends to do. And so there's a piano line over the drone based on the pitches of my tinnitus. So that also
Wow.
masks the tinnitus for me.
Mm.
So the hum was a therapeutic piece for me. So I can't
That's brilliant.
hear the hum of the city or my tinnitus when I listen to the hum. So
Yeah.
maybe it will offer some other people some relief of some sort.
But it's beautiful as well. It's just lovely. It's a lovely piece to listen to. So yeah, it's yeah, I would really encourage people to go and to look into it. So have you got plans for more music going forwards for yourself? Like I guess it's a personal thing, but it's also, people would love to hear more, I guess.
Yeah, I have some piano improvisations that I recorded on MIDI, so I'm able to edit them properly, as opposed to the ones I do on Instagram Live, which are the
Mm.
sound quality isn't awesome because it's Instagram Live.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I'm thinking of editing those so that into an album. I probably have enough for a full album. Um, and I got the idea. I was listening to some meditation recordings the last couple months, just because I was like, what sort of meditation recordings are people putting out in the world these days? And like I said, I used to teach meditation, and some of the meditations were not relaxing for me because I got very irked. Um,
Yeah, you're climbing
so
up a hill. That's that sort of thing.
so
Yeah.
I was like, I could do this. I used to just lead people through meditations. I can write some background music. So that's an idea I would
Mm.
like to play with. And going back to, we were talking before about how body scans aren't necessarily helpful for people if they aren't prepared. Of
Mm.
maybe doing some meditations that prepare people for that kind of work. To
Mm.
do meditations for people who have ME and it doesn't feel safe to focus on their body.
Mm.
Other sorts of
That sounds
meditations.
that sounds really good. Yeah, I was even something I was thinking about a couple of months ago, and yeah, I was thinking about how whether meditation was something we could incorporate in our YouTube channel or not. So we'll maybe talk about that more. But yeah, I don't know. But yeah, certainly, I think like I found that yeah, meditation with the body scanning, I was like, hang on a minute, this isn't working for me. So yeah, certainly like yeah, you've put into words a little bit in terms of like thinking, yeah, it probably wasn't the best thing at that time for me. But yeah, I was kind of a bit naive to it. It was just like, well, the Buddhism thing's interesting. I'll go along and yeah, it was yeah, the meditation's helpful. But yeah, I was like, whoa, what's all this? Yeah, so it was interesting. But no, it's been really good to talk. I'm just aware of like time and things, but yeah, thank you so much for coming on and talking. I think there's so much we could talk about a lot more, but
We
yeah, so
could go
maybe we'll have
on and
to.
on, but we need to pace ourselves.
Yes, definitely. But it's been so good to have you because I know that when we sort of first came up with an idea of a podcast, and it's coming up to like a year now. I know I got really excited. I've contacted quite a few people and didn't kind of really step back and realize like, oh, how much work was going to need to go into it all and things like that, and got excited. So yeah, it's taken us quite a while for us to get together, but you're on my list, and it's been so good to talk.
This
I
is
really appreciate
great.
you coming on. So
Yes, thank you.
it's been good. Yeah, we'll stop there. But thanks for listening, people, and do get in touch.